Firstly, thank you for accepting my invitation and accepting to be on my show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be invited.
So, Daniel, I thought to tell about your work and what you do to my audience.
Okay, so I have a couple of different hats. I am a professor of writing at the University of Wisconsin-Stout, and I'm a poet and I guess a writer in general. So I've published a few volumes of poetry, and my memoir, What the Fuzz: Survival Stories of a Minor League Mascot, will be out next January, I believe. So that's a little bit about me.
So, you're from?
I'm originally from Pennsylvania, but I currently live and work in Wisconsin.
Awesome.
And
So,
yeah.
you're working as a professor from?
hmm Yeah. I teach writing. I teach technical writing, creative writing, first year composition, that kind of thing at the university there.
So, how much time period you was there in this field and this profession?
I've been a professor for, I guess, about 11 years or so. I've been working and teaching as a professor. I've been writing pretty much my whole life, but yeah, that's about it.
So, what made you to come into this field, and what is your motivation? Who inspired you, and what actually made you to come into this?
As far as the teaching or the writing?
Both.
Okay, so writing has always been kind of therapeutic for me. I had some rough times as a kid, and I had some family members who had some mental illnesses and stuff like that, and it was a way for me to kind of cope with what was going on in my life. It allowed me to kind of talk about what I was going through and try to kind of rationalize it and try to figure it out without having to worry about the judgment of others. And then sometime over the course of my life, I started to realize that other people had similar experiences, and I started sharing my writing more and publishing because I thought it would be useful to people who had similar experiences, who had similar challenges, or maybe challenges that are completely different, but um, even though their challenges are different, there might have been some similar results, I guess. And so I think sharing my writing with them um, in that way, I think helped me. But it also means a lot when somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, I really identified or I really connected with this thing that you wrote or this thing that you read," and that makes you feel good. As far as teaching goes, I guess it was mainly I became a teacher. I became a professor largely because I had some reading issues when I was younger, and I had one teacher back in my high school who actually pulled me aside and worked with me to allow me to kind of overcome some of the issues that I had. I don't really know what it was. I believe it was like an undiagnosed learning disability is what I had, but I had a really hard time reading complex sentences. I could read the words, but I couldn't connect the larger ideas together. And after he worked with me, I started to realize the value of teachers and professors. And so I ended up going for my PhD in composition and TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages. And so I've worked a lot with international students at my current university and other universities that I've worked at, and it means a lot to me to kind of help people develop those literacy skills that will allow them to be successful in whatever their future endeavors might be.
So, what is the change that you observe when you started this?
What was
What is
the
the change that you observed in yourself when you started expressing your thoughts using the vocabulary that you have?
okay? So my expression, I think I used to have a lot of anxiety issues. I didn't have a whole lot of confidence. And I think that one of the biggest things that writing has given me is it gave me a voice. It gave me some sense of agency, I guess I would say. It allows me to feel like I don't have to hold things in. It gives me the I guess it gave me the confidence to speak, right? Because a lot of my life I didn't have that. I had a lot of people that were telling me that, children should be seen and not heard when I was growing up. I had family members that told me that I would never amount to anything, that I should go work in a gravel pit, and with my cousins. My cousins owned a gravel pit, and so they said, "Oh, why don't you just go work in the gravel pit with your cousins?" And I'm thinking, well, I'd like to go to college. Well, college isn't for you. College isn't for everybody, and and I think through writing, I was able to kind of gain a certain degree of confidence and a certain degree of agency that allowed me to kind of stand up for myself and speak out for myself and to advocate for others when the opportunity presents itself.
So, what is the first thing that you explained when you decided to do this?
Um, the first thing I explained to my family, or that I explained to, like, through writing in
Through
general?
through writing, through
Through
writing.
writing. Okay. Well, some of my first poems, they kind of grew a little bit out of, I was interested in Buddhism a little bit, and so some of my earlier poems, like Breathe, it's from my short chapbook Breathe Automatic. It was about connecting with life around me, as opposed to um, just, you know venting about my own issues or my own concerns, my own problems. It was about seeking connection, and so I think one of the first things that really came through my writing was finding the interconnectivity of the world and seeing how, human beings can connect with one another, and how, we connect with nature. Gardening was something that was a big outlet for me recently. um, the ability to kind of nurture something that will then give back to you, right? So, whether you're gardening broccoli or tomatoes or whatever, it's it was kind of seeking that connection with things that are outside of myself. And I think that writing through those experiences, and writing, seeking that connection through writing, was one of the first things that kind of presented and manifested.
So, what is the first book that you published?
The first book that I published was Breathe Automatic. It was a chapbook, um, of poetry, limited edition. There's not too many of them out there, but people don't really buy too many poetry books these days, at least not in the States. I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but yeah, this was my first publication. My second one was Sleepbringer. It's a full volume of poetry. This one focused on um, child loss, parenthood, and a search for kind of healing. Back in 2016, we had twin sons, and one of our twins died at birth, and so I kind of wrote through a lot of my anger and a lot of my confusion with this book. So that's Sleepbringer. So, and then my third book will be that memoir that comes out next year. So,
So, you're more into the real stories of yours.
yeah, I'm more of a, I mean, I write some fiction. I dabble with fiction, but even my fiction is largely inspired from my personal experiences. Um, so, like, on Instagram, I read a story, The Coal Bucket Cradle. Um, and that story that I read, I just posted, I think, yesterday or the day before. And that story was kind of informed by my own family history to a degree. My grandfather was born in the 1920s, late 20s, I think, like 28, 29. And it was about the time when things were starting to kind of turn. The Great Depression was starting, um, and they didn't have money to put gas into their vehicle, so they turned it into a Hoover wagon. And so in that story, the opening is this guy Stanislaw, who's sitting on this basically an old truck that's been stripped down and turned into a mule cart. So he has a team of mules pulling this thing around. It's called a Hoover wagon. I think in Canada they called it the Bennett buggy, because when the Depression hit Canada, they kind of had similar things. They couldn't afford gas, so they turned their cars and trucks into mule carts and horse-driven carriages. And so it's kind of funny to see some of those old pictures. If you ever get a chance to go and look around, just Google Hoover wagon and you'll find some really delightful photos. But yeah, so my grandfather was born in that time frame, and the way the family mythology is, I don't know how accurate it is. He's passed away, so I don't know. I can't really ask him how accurate this story is, but as the legend has it, he was the 13th child of a very large family. And my great grandmother was having some issues. She was hemorrhaging when she gave birth. He was a little bit early. The doctor had to make a choice whether he was going to give his attention to my grandfather or give his attention to his mother. And he looked at the other kids and said, well, these kids need their mother more than they need another brother. So he made a decision. He actually, according to legend, took my grandfather, put him in a coal bucket, and that's where he was discovered by his 5-year-old sister, who thought he was the most adorable little dolly in the world. So she actually went over and apparently picked him up, and my great aunt apparently looked at this horrified, thinking that she was playing with the dead baby, and then she realized the baby was still alive. And so then she helped to take care of my grandfather. So that's kind of the story behind the inspiration with the coal bucket cradle. And that largely, even when I write fiction, there's usually some element of reality, some element of truth that comes from my own life, some of my own experiences, or my family history in those ways. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I got
Okay.
your answer. Yeah. So you are into this communication medium since long time, right? So you are communicating with people with the words that you have.
Yes, I would say so. Yes.
Yeah.
I've been publishing poetry and short stories since, I think my first one was published in 2008. And so since then I've published in more than 50 magazines and journals. I have the 2 collections of poetry and then the memoir coming out, and I have a couple other books that are kind of simmering in the background. But yeah.
So what is there in you that you don't find in any other authors or writers?
The thing is, I think that everybody has something unique to say. So even if you have similar themes or similar ideas as somebody else, every author I think has influences. What a poet that was really influential to me, actually. I'm gonna mess up the name. I know it. Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore. Is that did I say it
Okay.
right? I don't know. He was an Indian poet, and he had this one quote that was very meaningful to me, and it was essentially, "When I stand before thee at the day's end, thou shalt see my scars, and know I had my wounds and also my healing." And that quote is a quote that really sticks with me and kind of carries with me. So even though people before me have had their wounds, they have had their scars, they have had their pain, my wounds and scars and healing, although they are different, were very similar to what they had gone through, right? What I'm going through in life isn't unique. Other people have lost babies, right? Other people have had parents who have suffered from, mental illness of some kind, right? So my experiences aren't unique, but the way that my experiences kind of presented may be a little different than they presented in other people. So I have unique experiences like that I think everybody has. So I think every writer, even if you're not a writer, even I don't know if you consider yourself a writer. Do you do any writing?
Yeah, I write in my blog.
Oh, okay. You do your blog. So the thing is, your blog has your own personal experiences, and your personal experiences are your own. And they might be similar to somebody else's, but you have a unique voice and a
Yeah,
unique perspective
yeah.
that you can articulate. Does that make sense?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
Uh,
I feel like the thing that makes me unique is just the way my experiences have presented themselves, and everybody's unique in that way, and so I think everybody has a degree of agency in that way.
so what made people to connect with your expressions?
What was
What made people to connect with your expressions?
Oh, I'm not really sure. um I don't know. As far as expressing myself or expressing themselves, or
Expressing your experience through your books, through
oh,
your writing.
right. Well, I mean, I've had some interesting conversations with people over the years, um, especially when you get into personal topics. But my son who died, was his name's Alistair, and there was a certain camaraderie that kind of came when I wrote Sleepbringer, and I was writing about those experiences, and I was pretty angry in some of those poems. Um, and then I started to connect with other parents who had similar experiences, and the writing kind of gave us a sense of common purpose. They were like, that may not be the way that I would have written it, but that is totally the emotion that I have, and the emotion that I'm experiencing daily, right? So I think that there's a humanity in writing that allows us to connect with one another if we're open to it, right? And so if you're speaking honestly, and I think that's the important thing. I think when you write, whether you're writing fiction, nonfiction, poetry, you have to write with honesty, right? Does that make sense?
Correct.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's largely it. So
So do you have sounds which will tell exactly what you're feeling?
sounds or
Words.
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 Oh yeah, yeah, words that yeah. Uh, do you want a specific example?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as far as uh, I do curse a little bit. I use the F word a little bit in my poems. And it's not intended to be vulgar in that way. But it is useful. Because sometimes using an angry curse is the only word that's appropriate, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I do like imagery. I think that the most powerful writing that we have today uses imagery, right? Pictures, sights, smells, sensory perception, right? I think the best writing today is tangible in that way, because that's how we're meant to experience the world. So if you're reading a poem, and uh, the poem is kind of describing the setting for you, you can get a sense of place or purpose. And so I think that imagery is really important in my writing, and I think in all writing. I think in my opinion.
So so you said you are you teach how to write the technical content also.
Yes. Yeah. I've always been kind of a little bit of a nerd when it comes to technology, and so yeah, it was something that kind of grew out of my, I guess, other interests. So yeah, so I've taught technical and scientific communication at UW-Stout for pretty much since I've been there, and it's really a lot more similar to creative writing than I think a lot of people give it credit for. Because it's all about creation, and it's all about effective communication. And you want to, whether you're writing a poem or whether you're writing a manual, you want your words to be accessible. You want your thoughts to be accessible. In poetry, you may be dealing a little bit more with emotion, but the idea is kind of the same. You want to be able to make your writing accessible to other people so that they can understand what you're communicating. So yeah, so I've taught some technical writing and scientific communication as well.
So, as a person who did masters in software engineering and who is into technology,
Hmm.
as a person who is into technical writing for like 3 to 4 years,
Hmm.
my question to you is, because you are into this creative writing from long time, because you know how to frame sentences and how to put it in a form so that you can tell exactly what you're feeling to the readers who are reading.
Hmm.
So, is there any specific way that people should follow in order to get their thoughts out and make people understand?
So are we talking specifically about technical writing?
Yeah,
Okay. So technical writing is a little bit, it's slightly different in the sense that ideas are extremely important, right? You might not be dealing so much with emotion because emotion actually could muddy the water a little bit, but um, imagery is very useful. The way that we write about a sense of place in a poem is very similar to the way that we would write about a handbook, like write a handbook for a piece of software, right? Because if I can't imagine what the screen looks like, it's really hard for me to follow along. So some of the things that you can do with technical writing is to make it multimodal, to incorporate images whenever possible, right? You have that old saying, "A picture's worth 1,000 words."
yeah,
Yeah, and that there's a certain amount of truth to that.
yeah,
At the same time, you can't let the pictures do all the work for you, right? Otherwise, you'd have a technical report and you'd have a section called findings or discussion, and it would have, or results, and it would just have table after table after chart, right? And the idea is if you're writing a kind of a technical report that has images, graphs, charts, you want to make sure that you have words to complement those, right? So you want to
yeah,
make sure that you have a paragraph that talks about the important details, right? Now, as with poetry, same thing goes with technical writing. If you try to talk about too many details at once, your audience can shut off, right? But it's the idea of just giving them just the right amount of detail so that they can follow along and that they can access and understand what you're saying.
1 second.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Not a
It
problem.
was a bug. It was a bug.
uh, what time is it where you're at?
It's night. You can see.
Yes. How late? Midnight?
Yeah, it's 11 p.m.
11 p.m. Okay. All right. So
Yeah,
you are on the other side of the world.
other side and other climate, other weather, everything
Well, I mean, it might
different.
feel pretty similar today because it's summer for you, right? And
Summer is over. Yeah,
summer's over. Oh,
yeah,
okay. So it's cooling off. Okay.
yeah.
I was
That's
I
why
was
the
saying,
bugs are coming outside.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting out here. It's summer and it's in Fahrenheit. We're about 94 degrees right now, so it's feeling
Okay.
a little balmy. So
Okay. So, so you said about the technical writing. So you are into writing for a long time. So this is one of the important communication medium that every human will be in his life or in her life for sure in their education while they are studying. So what you observe in people generally as a professor, you see a lot of people writing. What are the general mistakes that you do that they do?
Um, I think it depends on what they're writing. I think in technical writing, uh, there's often, as I mentioned before, you can't let the images do all the lifting. So in technical writing, I see one of the big mistakes is a student will throw in a graph or a chart, and they'll assume that their audience is going to understand what's in the graph and the chart. And so their text reads, "See the chart below for the findings from my study." And then you have a couple of like bar graphs and column graphs and maybe a scatter plot thing. And you look at them and you're saying, okay, this is interesting data. I don't know why this is important, right? And so there's usually a gap in between letting the data speak for itself and then explaining the significance or the importance of that data. So in technical writing, I think the most common concern, I wouldn't say error, I would say concern, would be making the text, the written words, and the data, the graphs and charts, make them complementary. Don't let them do the work by themselves. You can't just write a paragraph and not show us anything. Same thing, you can't just show us a graph and not tell us anything. You need to have a little bit of both, and they need to be complementary. In creative writing, I think it's similar. It's kind of related, I guess. In images, there's a lot of showing that you need to do in creative writing, and often people like to tell you, like, Jose was angry, right? You can say Jose was angry, but if you show him, white knuckling the wheel of his car, or describing the coloration of his face, right? So maybe his face is flushed and his eyebrows are narrowed. If you describe some of those attributes a little bit more vividly, we can see that he's angry, and you don't have to tell us that Jose was angry, right? So descriptive details, sensory details, not being afraid to embellish those details a little bit. It's always a lot easier to put too much information in than too little information in, right? If you put too much information in, it's easier to weed out what you don't need. If you start light, it's a lot harder to add information back in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I
So
got you.
cool.
So so you said you started writing something that is your personal and you wanted to tell to somebody and you used this medium as an outlet,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? So I'm sure like you said, it is very important for the writer to be 100% honest in order to create an impact or the effect,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, Honesty, even if you're writing fiction, if you're not being honest, it's going to be harder for your audience to connect with you. Um, so, for example, I'm writing a middle grade series right now. Um, it's an environmental fantasy series where um, you're dealing with the angst of, you know, adolescence. If I don't accurately represent the angst that kids are feeling today, it's going to be harder for them to connect with the writing, right? If I am stuck in, say, the 1980s and 1990s when I was a kid, if I'm using my experiences, that can only go so far, because the experiences of kids today are so different, at least in the States, from what I had to go through, right? My kids growing up are going through different experiences than I had. Similar struggles, there's some universal concepts that kind of come up, But if I'm not doing the legwork to try to emulate or try to represent honestly what kids are going through today, kids are going to shut off, and they're not going to really take what I'm saying seriously. And I think that same thing goes with no matter what you're writing. You need to make sure that you are doing some research. If you're writing about people who are not you, you need to make sure that you are researching what those people are going through. If I have some characters in my novel who are from another country, I should research the customs of those people, and I should get some insider help, right? And if we were talking about linguistics research, which I did as a graduate student, we call that member checking in ethnographic research. When you go and you contact people who are in the discourse community that you're trying to communicate with, and you have to get their feedback to say, okay, so this is my take on this. Is this honest? Is this accurate? Because if you have a character who is of a different cultural background and you misrepresent that, you're going to anger pretty much everybody that's part of that cultural background. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So one of the best examples I can think of is J.K. Rowling. I'm assuming you've heard of her. She wrote what was it? There was a book that she wrote, Casual Vacancy, and there were characters who were Sikh in her novel. If she got the details wrong about what the Sikh religion was about, or what these specific characters' experiences were, there would be a lot of issues that would be popping up from that book. But I think she did her due diligence. I think she represented and she did the right things to try to ensure that she was accurately representing that community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, understood you. So do
Yeah.
you put any limits or any borders while you are expressing your imagination?
Do I put limits?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say I would put limits, but I would highly recommend that when you're writing that you have an open mind, right? You can't become so personally invested in your art or in your story that you aren't willing to take feedback, right? So, for example, I've written some things in the past, and I had some people tell me that, oh, this character came across as a little misogynistic, right?
Okay.
And my initial reaction, which I think a lot of authors would be, I'm not a misogynist. I'm I'm not. I don't hate women, But the critique wasn't them calling me a misogynist. It was calling this character comes across as misogynist. And then I had to make the decision, do I want that character to come across that way? So then you have to have a little bit of distance. You take a step back and you listen to what their feedback is and you say, okay, is this accurate? Is this not accurate? Is there some merit to what they're saying? And if they're saying this, do I want my character to come across that way? And that opens you up to, okay, so I can revise certain things, right? This person used a certain terminology in a conversation. They made an off-color joke, and that off-color joke really kind of colored him this way. I can take that joke out. I can rewrite the character a little bit, and then I can make sure that my character's coming off in the way that he's meant to come off, right? As opposed to having this distraction of people reacting in a way that I don't want them to react, right? So I wouldn't say that I would have any limits. I wouldn't say that, oh, you shouldn't include characters of different cultures. You shouldn't include this type of topic or subject matter. I would say that what you need to do is, if you're going to write honestly about things, you need to be open to feedback, though. So no, I wouldn't say there's restrictions, but I would say you have to be able to take feedback and constructive criticism and be able to internalize that and apply that.
So why people are connecting to your books?
Some of it's from shared experiences. at least according to the reviews, I guess. Um, some people say that the writing is accessible. I think that is probably the biggest compliment I've received from people. Um, a lot of times there's a temptation for novice writers, people who are starting out. Um, they want to sound smart, right? And so they dress up their vocabulary. They have a thesaurus, and they're going through the thesaurus and finding words to make them sound prolific. And prolific writing has a place, I suppose, but it's never going to connect with an audience if they can't access it, if the language isn't the way that people talk. Um, so I think that accessibility, the details that I use, the use of metaphor, I use everyday items, right? Everyday situations. I wrote a poem called Learning Under High Bridge, where I was walking through a park with my son, and I'm having all of this angst of a nervous parent, right? My kid's now starting to walk. It was when my 7-year-old was about 1, so he was just toddling around, and there's a big river, and there's this little guardrail, this little fence, and he keeps on reaching through the fence. And there's a part of me as a young parent that's looking at that going, I can see my kid sliding through that fence at just the right angle. He's going to end up in the water, and then I'm going to have to go dive in after him. And I had this whole horror scenario playing in my head, because I'm seeing all of a sudden everything seems dangerous because I'm a new parent. My kid doesn't know better. I have to keep him safe. So that's an experience I think a lot of young parents deal with, right? Um, you know what I mean? So I
Yeah, yeah,
think
yeah.
I think because I'm writing about personal situations, I'm writing about scenarios that people can imagine. I'm not really. I would be a terrible science fiction writer, largely because I don't know how to imagine a technology and then articulate that in a way that would be accessible. Everything I have to write about seems to have to be kind of rooted in something that's tangible to me. So that's, I think, what it is. I write about, my experiences. I write about commonplace situations, commonplace settings, and I write about experiences that I think a lot of people go through, and that resonates with them because of that.
Awesome. So you said about writing until now. So coming to, have you heard about virtual reality?
Virtual reality, yes. Yes, my students love VR. They do.
So have you ever thought to write a book on it?
Thought to write a book on virtual reality?
Yeah.
Um, I can see myself kind of incorporating that as maybe a subplot of a story. I don't see myself being able to write, like, for the same reason about science fiction. I would be a terrible science fiction writer. I feel like the same thing with virtual reality. I've played virtual reality games. Um, in the Mall of America in Minnesota, they have this whole third floor that's just virtual reality games, right? So it's like a virtual reality arcade, and there are parts of me that I don't quite get it. It doesn't quite seem virtual enough that it's like real, but at the same time, I know a lot of soldiers are coming in with PTSD, right? And virtual reality has this wonderful therapeutic aspect of it, right? Where they can take a soldier who's suffering from PTSD, they put them in the scenario that they were in when they had their trauma initially, and then they can kind of talk through it and relive that experience again and again and again. And the idea is that they can then learn how to cope with that experience, right? So virtual reality has wonderful implications, and I could see me kind of coming at some of those implications tangentially, but I don't know if I would be able to write a whole book about virtual reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
understood you. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So So tell me about purity in your book.
Purity?
Yeah.
In what way?
In your expression, the way you are expressing the uh, the the words that you choose to explain the scenario or the situation that you have in your head.
Okay. So kind of explain the process and the procedure, how I go about doing that?
Uh, when a person reads your book,
Oh,
the impact that they feel and the percentage of purity that you put in the book.
okay. Um, I'm not really sure. I think every reader brings something to whatever they're reading, right? So when you read something, it's going to be very different from the experience that I have reading something, because your life experiences, like I said before, are your own, and my life experiences are my own. So we all kind of, I think all readers come to whatever writing they're reading, they're coming to it with their own baggage to a degree, right? They have their own experiences, and that through their own experiences, they're going to filter those experiences out. Um, so I'm not. So as far as I'm not sure. I'm getting hung up on the word purity, I guess, um, because I feel like I don't know. I don't really know how to come at it from the purity angle. I would just I think I would just say that writing honestly about your own experiences, and if you can make those experiences general enough, you don't want to be too specific. I guess there would be a sense of purity in the idea that like people can universally access them. Parenthood, people can generally across multiple cultures understand the angst of parenthood, right? Um, and so I think thematically sticking with things that are accessible, things that are generally accessible across multiple cultures, I think can be very useful in writing. If you get too specific, I think you could have a chance of shutting readers off a little bit. I don't know if that addressed this.
Are you good in understanding emotions?
I'm getting better at understanding emotions. Um, I think emotions were very difficult for me because of my own personal baggage that I mentioned before, my own experiences. I would say the being a parent has helped me with that. Being a teacher has helped me immensely with that. Um, there are times when students are going through troubles, and um, helping them to kind of talk through and figure their way back to a sense of stability is really useful. Same thing goes with my kids. My 7-year-old, he's going through emotional growing pains, right? Um, he's having new experiences. COVID, with the COVID pandemic, which I think is pretty bad where you're at right now, right? Um, it's it's creating a new angst that emotions are coming up and welling up in people that the emotions that they didn't necessarily previously have, right? um, because of isolation or because of being cut off from family, that kind of thing. So um, emotion has always been difficult for me. I think that usually comes from trauma. Happiness is the most difficult emotion for me. um, and I think it's largely because even when happy times were going on in my childhood, I was always keenly aware that they were about to end. So I was going through my life. The best way I can phrase it, it would be you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, right?
Okay.
Something bad happens, things start to get better, but you know that there's something that's going to come over here that's going to ruin it. And so my mind growing up was very centered around negativity. And it was always looking at the negative things, the glass half empty kind of mentality. But I would say that as I've gotten older, as I've kind of written my way through some of those emotions, I've become a little bit more comfortable writing about happy things, joy, and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know.
I can see a psychologist in you.
I maybe I don't maybe or maybe I've just seen a lot of psychologists. That could be too. But yeah. Yeah, trauma is one of those things that got me into writing. It started out as the main motivation for my writing. But as you get past and overcome some of those past traumas, it creates the emotional space for you to be able to be happy. So for a long time, like I said, I wasn't happy in pretty much every aspect of my life. I was unhappy. And it's still something I struggle with today, but I'm getting better at being happy and better at writing happy, if that makes sense.
So, do you have any other communicating mediums with which you feel very happy and you are good in?
I'm starting to get into making videos a little bit. Sometimes they're instructional videos. I started out doing learning class videos to kind of teach. So on YouTube, if you find me, I have a couple little tutorials about where do you get ideas when you're writing. Where are some places that I can go if I want to write something and I have no ideas, I'm blocked. Where can I go to get ideas? And so I have some tutorials about that. I have some tutorials about how to write a poem, and I've been experimenting with doodle videos lately, mainly for educational purposes. But I feel like I'm getting better with those as well. So multimodality, I think writing isn't just words anymore. And so learning how to communicate with words, with spoken language through podcasts, like what you're doing now. Podcasts are another form of writing, right? It's another medium in which writing is kind of presented and accessed by an audience. And so I think it's really important to think that writing isn't just the words on a page anymore. And to be honest, I don't think they ever were. I think that language was always meant to be multimodal to a degree, because even alphabetic language, at least in English specifically, because that's the world I live in, the English language is, there are these symbols, right? And these symbols represent sounds. You put these symbols together, you put sounds together, you have a word, right? And it's really not all that different than like Egyptian hieroglyphics from ancient Egypt. You have pictures that represent ideas and words, and as those ideas and words come together, then you have a written language, right? I think language is always meant to be tangible and accessible and multimodal in that way. Even if you're talking about Braille, typed language, Braille for blind
Yeah,
readers,
yeah.
right? The bumps on the page is a very tangible sensory perception that allows us to experience language with different senses, right? And so in that way, I think writing, whether it's visual, whether it's texture, writing is always multimodal. It's always got multiple uses. Spoken language and written language, they're very similar, but they're also very different things. And I think we rely on all of these in order to communicate effectively.
Have you struggled in searching the words that you struggled in searching the words to explain your feeling or the experience that you have?
Um, yeah, sometimes. Sometimes I struggle to find the right words. sometimes it's like I said, I think sometimes when I use the curses, right, when I say a curse word or something in a poem, a lot of times that's just because that's the only word that seems to make sense, right? That's the only word that can capture the visceral anger that I'm feeling or the visceral frustration that I'm feeling. Um, Sometimes picking the right image, the right metaphor, simile, to describe what's going on, that can be a challenge because there's so many images out there. And the way that I mentioned before that writing through your own experience needs to be kind of accessible to other people. Uh, you need to make sure that you're using images that other people can relate to, right? For example, my dad worked in mortuary and autopsy equipment. He made more mortuary equipment for hospitals, and I think he was in Mumbai once, and he was installing he was building a morgue in a hospital. I think in Mumbai, back in the 90s, like late 90s, early 2000s, maybe. Um, and he also went to the United Arab Emirates and other places to just build hospitals and stuff like that. And when I was a kid, he would sometimes take me to work, and he made one day he made skin boxes for me, which sounds terrible, right? A box for human skin, but what it is it's for grafts, right? Skin transplants, those kinds of things. And so he would have these. He was making these foam boxes that were intended to keep the skin at a viable temperature, so that way when it gets transported, it can be viable when it gets on the other end, so that the donor tissue doesn't go bad. Very important work. But when I write about those kinds of images and things, it's important for me to keep in mind that not a lot of kids, when they're 12 years old, are going to be able to make skin boxes the way I did with my dad, right? My dad worked for a company that developed something called the Cadaver Go Round, right? Um, as that experience is kind of hovering in my history, my own personal history, I can't really necessarily write about it in the same way because people aren't going to have that experience. People might not be able to identify with that experience. People might be turned off by that experience. So when I'm selecting my images, when I'm even talking about some of those past experiences, you need to make sure that you are keeping it, using the images that other people can relate to as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
understood you.
So yeah, so you always have to make sure that your audience, that you're aware of your audience's experiences and what they're bringing to the table, so that way you can make it as accessible as possible. And I think that's the biggest challenge, I think, for writing, is to anticipate the needs of the audience and then meet them where they are. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So as a person who knows the value and the importance of the words, have you ever thought about these symbols, alphabets, and words, this language? Have you ever tried to understand other languages and words and try to understand who created this, why we, and what is the reason he created this? And do you think that in coming days, maybe after 100 years, do you think that this language and these words exist still? If some natural disaster happens and everything vanishes from the world?
um, there's a lot in that question. I would I, I would say yes, obviously. When I was going for my PhD in composition and TESOL, um, I had to think about, again, my audience. If I'm working with students from other countries with other languages, yes, I have to think about how they relate to one another. I had to think about, okay, in America we shake hands, but if I have a student that's coming from Japan, might not shake hands, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
they might be uncomfortable. Or if I'm shaking hands with somebody from, I don't know, India. Uh,
yeah,
if I shake really aggressively, like an American handshake, that could be taken,
yeah,
you know, that would be like, oh my gosh, he's gonna kill me, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Whereas, it's so being aware of different cultures and how they communicate, not just the language they use, but how they use the language, is very useful. It's essential. Um, I've tried to learn other languages. I've tried to learn a little bit of German. I've tried to learn Japanese. I had some friends from Japan in grad school who tried to teach me Japanese, and it was hard. It was very hard for me. And then I Spanish. I did a lot of Spanish in high school. So I've had some of those multilingual experiences that have kind of allowed me to kind of develop some empathy when I'm trying to teach somebody English who's coming from a different culture. But when you start to think about how language evolves, I'm convinced that if humanity survives long enough, there will be a more of a universal language. And I think maybe we're kind of working with that with computers,
Yeah.
binary code in computers.
Yeah.
That's kind of a universal
Correct.
language,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
kind of bridges many different cultures because you're working with these technologies and they need to communicate with one another. So maybe we're already working on that with computers, but I'm convinced that we're going to start to break down some of the barriers that exist between language. And I feel like if humanity does hang in there and we don't do something incredibly stupid and end humanity prematurely, because I do feel like we have our own destiny in our hands at this point, I think. And I think it's up to human beings, people, to determine our fate as a species, I suppose. But I do feel like we're going to get to a point where languages are going to kind of merge, and we're going to have a handful of, I guess, universal languages that are going to be largely understood, even more so than what we have now. So, for instance, English. English is, in my opinion, I think of English as a Creole language, probably the world's most widely spoken Creole language. Do you understand what I mean by Creole?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you think about it, it started as a Germanic dialect from these Germanic tribes in Europe. They go over to Britain. They take their Germanic language with them. So then you have things like say wudu is technically translates as seawood. That's a boat, right? So in Old English, seawudu, seawood, boat. We can kind of see how that kind of morphologically happens, right? And then in 1066 AD, you have the French come over, and the French hop over across the pond, hop across the strait there in between mainland and Britain. They take over things, and then you start to have fancier words like castle. There are things like I should have written these things down before. It's hard to kind of think on the fly, but you have other words that come into mind. So you have rooms and chambers. Essentially, those mean the same thing, but the upper class, the French aristocrats, would say chamber as opposed to room, which the peasants would use. That sort of thing. So we would have different words for different things for different classes of people, but you eventually have these two languages coming into conflict. They need to do commerce. They need to communicate with one another. So French influence creeps into the Germanic language, and then we have Middle English. Then you have English that goes all around the world. So if you go to Australia English developed because it came into contact with different cultures, different languages. Those languages kind of came together, and then you had the Australian dialect kind of being born out of that. In the Americas, you had a very different English that was developing in the United States because we split off and we had different experiences, different linguistic conflicts, so to speak. Canada hung with Britain for a little bit longer, so their variety of English is still a little bit different, more in line with the British English, and so on and so forth. So you can kind of see how, if you take a look at English language as a whole, English language evolves, and it continues to evolve because of the cultures and the languages, the linguistic conflicts that happen. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So I feel like if we last long enough, I guess a long-winded answer to that is if we hang around long enough, I do feel like our words are going to continue. I do feel like these ideas will continue to endure, but I do feel that languages are going to kind of find a middle ground, and there's going to be a handful of, like I said, universal languages that are going to um, be languages that everybody can kind of communicate a little bit with. So.
So, like you mentioned, it is an universal language, and also you mentioned that this computer language is something that any person from any country can connect and can communicate with each other if they learn this.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you believe that as a human being, is there any other species or other species on other planet which understands this language?
Oh, okay. That's a curveball. I think logically, I think that how do I put it? How do I put it? I think it's arrogant of the human species if we think that we're the only one that exists. I think that would be that's kind of arrogant for your human beings who say, I don't believe in aliens, I don't believe in extraterrestrials, I don't think that there's any possibility they could exist. The only intelligent life on Earth, in the world, in the universe, is on Earth here. Um, I think that is unlikely. I think that it's much more likely that there is some intelligent life out in space. I don't know whether they have the ability to come here or not yet. I doubt it. I don't think so. But it doesn't mean that they aren't out there, right? It doesn't mean that there isn't another intelligent life form in the universe somewhere in the cosmos. But yeah, that being said, I think it would be arrogant for us to say that there's no possibility to have intelligent life elsewhere. But I also think that if any intelligent life has the ability to come here, um, they're going to be far more advanced than we could be, right? At this point. So, yeah, I do think there's some intelligent life out there. I do feel like there's a possibility that they'd be able to understand some of us. Yes.
So recently, I came to know that human have sent some message in this language, not only in English, in different languages.
Mm-hmm.
He put some hard some data in a device and sent in the space, and it went far away from the Earth. It is thousands of kilometers far away from the Earth. I was thinking that is that we are sending this language to try to send a message and tell that there is a planet called Earth exists here, and we speak this language, and we are the species here. We are doing this. There are certain symbols and pictures mentioned in that
Mm-hmm.
something they are sending some message. And also I came to know that in there is a space station which have in some country have observed some sound, some different sound, which human is thinking that some other species have sent some indirect message that there is
Yeah.
some species. So these communication. So as a person who is into communication from long time, so what do you think about all these things? Is this works what human effort is?
Yeah. I I think that inevitably something could come across that, and uh, it's kind of like with us. We've had those signals in the past. We've picked up radio signals that have some people are saying this could be a sign that there's somebody out there trying to communicate,
Yeah,
right? With some
yeah.
residual signals. I think it's unlikely that, like with us, we're able to pick up those signals and say there seems to be some kind of a pattern here. There seems to be some intelligence behind these signals. What that intelligence is, we don't really know. And I feel like that's going to be similar to what another culture in the cosmos might experience if they stumbled upon our device. They would understand that there's some intelligence that went into creating this thing and sending this probe out into deep space. they could take a look at that and they could maybe determine that some of these could be some basic languages, right? The way that people communicate could be the same kind of thing with them. But I don't know whether they would necessarily be able to decode that language and attribute meaning to that language unless they were able to make direct contact back. So I think what it is, I think basically what we did was we put up a flare to say basically, we are here, come say hello, right? And I think it would take time for us to be able to understand the different cultures, right? And I think it would take time for them to be able to decode our language and for us to maybe decode their language. So it would probably be a lot involved before we would actually be able to communicate effectively with interplanetary beings. But it's kind of a fun thing to think about. I definitely think it's kind of cool. But yeah, so I would think in short, I think that it's too elementary, I think, for them to be able to interpret our meaning, but basically they would be able to look at that and say, yes, there's a flare, something or someone is out there sending this thing. And I think that's about the equivalent of what we've done.
So recently, I have exchanged words with a person who is into study of underwater things, underwater animals. He'll be finding the new species and trying to name it. So, do you think that in coming days, he's putting different names for different animals that he's finding, and based upon the size and the shape of it, he's trying to put the name. If it comes under lizard or the fish, or they are putting, there is a set of people who's naming uh, to those species. Do you think that in coming days, if these words human is giving these names, as a person who plays with the words, as a person who understands the language well, as a person who is into communication system from long time, what do you say about this, putting names to things that he's saying? Do you think that other species understands the names?
I don't think that's necessarily, no, I don't think so. I think when we're naming things as human beings, a lot of times we draw those names from dead languages like Latin. Well, not quite. They're pretty dead. They're pretty dead. Not a whole lot of people are out there speaking Latin these days. They might speak a language that was derived from Latin, right? Something that has some ancestry with Latin. But largely, when we name things, when we give them scientific names, we're using a universal language like Latin to kind of name those things, right? Which is why dinosaur names. My son's really into dinosaurs. It's really hard to pronounce those things because they're just obscure words that don't have much meaning to me. But I think what it would take is basically, there are times, especially when we think about dinosaur bones. Let's use that as an example. There have been dinosaurs that have been discovered in North America, and they've also been discovered in Europe, and they've had some of their remains discovered in Africa, right? And sometimes you have two names for two different skeletons that are actually the same species, right? Until we are able to like compare our notes and say, oh, okay, now we're gonna consolidate these. This is one species, so we're gonna pick one name for them. But Megalodon, the shark Megalodon, has multiple names throughout history. When it was first discovered, it was one name, and then they did some more research and they found out that Megalodon lived much more contemporarily than we originally had thought. So therefore they changed the name because it could no longer be an ancestor of this kind of shark, right? It turns out it's a different species. It's its own different thing. So they ended up adding names to it, right, to make Megalodon something else. So a lot of times when we name things, you have two people that have the same discovery, and they don't have contact with one another, and they're each going to give it their own name, right? And the name becomes kind of arbitrary. I think it's kind of a placeholder. The way that we name things here in the States in English, in the English language, and the way that people might name things in Arabic or in Hindi or in any other language, they're going to be, these discoveries are happening parallel to one another. And so, yeah, I feel like names are just they're kind of a placeholder. They're a way to decode things. And I don't necessarily have a problem with people naming things, giving a name to things. There are things when I was a kid that I discovered that I called certain things, right? Maybe a type of snake, and I gave it its own name. Well, that's that snake there. And then, I'd learn throughout history, oh, this snake already has a name. And so then I would incorporate that name, right? I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, in short, I would say they're discovering new creatures all the time. The world, as far as the diversity of life that exists. And I think that naming things is okay. Naming things is kind of the first step to understanding things. And if somebody comes along and it turns out they also have a name, and we have two competing names, then we have a conversation to determine what we are going to call this thing moving forward, right? But I think naming things is important. It's the kind of like that first step of discovery. You have to give a name to something before you can start to understand it, I think.
So at last, as a professor, I want you to tell something to the people who watches this video or who listens to you uh, uh, and me uh, through this video or audio clip after 100 years. Do you have any message to them?
After 100 years. Whew. Yeah, stay curious. I think that my message for anybody, whether it be today or in the future, it's basically don't ever think that you don't ever think that you have all the answers, right? I think as an American, and I think I use this for my own, my own colleagues, I guess, my brothers and sisters here in America. I think that we have this topic of American exceptionalism, right? And it's a myth, and I think it's kind of something that the United States, here in the United States, I think we do things badly because we think that our way is the right way and it's the only way, right? And what that does is it kind of hinders growth, right? It makes it so we can't expand our knowledge because we're kind of closed off to it. We're closed-minded. And if I take a look at the United States where I live, the second that you start to believe in American exceptionalism, you largely are kind of disregarding other cultures, other people. In the future, I feel like that's probably going to be similar. There's future societies, whoever are existing 100 years from now. Maybe we still have countries, maybe we don't. Maybe we're living in Star Trek then, But I largely think that as humans become more advanced, as we gain more knowledge, it's important to understand that the more that you know, the more that you learn, the less you know about everything else, if that makes sense.
Okay,
right?
okay.
I think Neil deGrasse Tyson said that well. I think he said it much better than I did. The more we learn, the less we know, right?
Wow. Yeah,
Or the
yeah.
more we're aware of, the less we know. And so I think my main advice on the whole, just to kind of try to wrap that up. Sorry, I'm kind of meandering all over. But I think my main thought was just remember that you don't know everything. Stay curious. Always ask the questions, right? And don't ever be afraid of the answers. Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a fantastic message to all the people who are watching and listening to this from anywhere on this planet, not only from this planet, if they can understand from other planet also.
Oh, if I can, hello. If there's
If
somebody out there watching, yeah, hey.
yeah, if this
That's
video or audio saved in some data center, if the natural disaster didn't spoiled this audio or video clip, if you're watching this, this is a message from a great professor from a uh, part of this planet.
fair enough. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So at last, so what do you say about to the people about your books? That people, if you want, if they want to read
Oh,
books, what is there in your books, and what you can tell to them, and what they can find in your
sure.
books?
Yeah. Well, you can find Breathe Automatic and Sleep Bringer. They are available in print books, obviously, but I believe they're also both available in ebooks as well. I think right now they're only on Barnes and Noble, but I believe they should be coming to Amazon soon and all of that. So eventually there'll be ebooks available everywhere, but you can find Breathe Automatic, Sleep Bringer. If you go to danielroofman.com, www.danielroofman.com, you should find my website and you should be able to contact me there, and I can tell you how to best secure those copies. And then next year, What the Fuzz, Survival Stories of a Minor League Mascot, that hits the shelves in January, and that will be available in paper in ebook as well, maybe an audiobook, not knock wood. That'll be available soon, so keep an eye out for it. And if you want to connect with me on Twitter or Instagram, you can do that as well.
So I'll put all your links in the description of this video. People who find
Okay,
your video, they can find your book links and your social media links.
sounds great.
Yeah. So at last, have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube? And what do you say about this interview? This
Oh,
about the planet questions of mine, my
yes.
communication skills.
I think that your communication skills are excellent. I think they're getting better actually as we go. I've seen some of your videos, and I love how you have a little bit of these diverse perspectives that are coming in, and you're introducing us to people that we didn't know existed in some cases, or maybe some people who we did know but we haven't had a chance to really connect with. And I think that these kinds of interviews are great for interconnection, which is the whole purpose of the human condition. We want to understand each other, we want to know each other, and it seems like you want to get to know other people and other ways of thought. And I think that that's a wonderful example for us as we move forward.
So if in future when you publish any books or anything that comes out from you, I will tell to my audience.
Okay.
So yeah,
I'll
and
keep you posted.
yeah, so that I will know that you're doing something in some part of the world. Then I
Okay.
can tell to the
Sure.
people who are following me.
That'd be great.
So yeah,
That'd be great. Thank you.
yeah. So thank you very much, sir, for giving me your valuable time and spending your valuable words in my show.
It was a pleasure to meet you and a pleasure to be a part of it. Thank you.
So can I put this video and audio clip on my YouTube channel
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
with your permission?
You have my permission to use the video as you see fit.
Yeah, and also on my podcast, website, internet, everywhere with your
Yes.
permission.
Yes. You can use this video however you need to. Yes.
Yeah. So
Okay.
thank you, Daniel, for everything, and I hope you do what you are doing and do what you love, and make people learn so much from you. And I'm sure your contribution to this planet will be uh, great.
I
Learn,
hope
yeah.
I hope to make a small difference in a small part that carries. But thank you. With gratitude and friendship, thank you.
Yeah, you already did through this contribution, the
Fantastic.
change.
All righty.
Thank you,
Well, it was
sir.
nice chatting. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.